Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, brought to you by the FTN Network. I'm your host, Walt Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85. Another late night, but we're out here doing our thing. Appreciate all of you guys who continue to support the show, whether that's live or on demand. We'll ask you real quick. All interactions are so helpful. If you're watching on YouTube or over on Twitter/X, likes, comments, reposts, and retweets, all of that stuff helps the show a tremendous amount. Please continue to show your support that way. We are going to have a nice, clean amount of fun here tonight. There is a 12-game slate on DraftKings. That is what we're going to be covering, the main slate. There is also, a 6-game night slate, which there will be coverage for that in the Discord tomorrow and projections for both. The show will predominantly be about this 12-gamer, though, which starts a half hour earlier than what you are accustomed to, so make sure you don't get caught with your pants down. Sometimes that can lead to a rushed lock. There will be a myriad of news as usual and a bunch of starting lineup stuff that we're going to go over throughout the day tomorrow, projections, all kinds of context notes, everything that you need to be successful. We are knee-deep into conference play now. They say in the MLB season, midsummer or right about, July? The dog days of the season, the grind. Well, we're kind of in that now when it comes to college basketball season. Non-con is in the rear-view mirror. We're in the beginning stages of conference play, 2-3 games deep for most teams, and we have the next month and a half to really roll up our sleeves, put on our big boy pants, and grind through these slates. There are Mania seats still available for the end-of-year DK tournament, and obviously after last year with the success of Survivor, there will be that as well coming into March, but lots of opportunities here to build up your bankroll. Contests are starting to get bigger. Prize pools are starting to get better as the NFL season winds down. We're into the playoffs there. The semifinals of the college football playoff are taking place this week, so we're just about done with college football as well. It'll be wall-to-wall college basketball action between myself covering DFS side of things and the betting side, and then, of course, Mike Randall, his show's taking place in the morning on the betting side as well. Lots of content for you here at FTN, whether you're a member or not. Watching us on YouTube, lots of tidbits, info, and trinkets of stuff that you can get to be a winning player. I also want to announce, we've been doing the projections for every slate, doing the context notes. Now that college football is about over, starting Sunday, we will have full slate breakdown write-ups on site. So in addition to the Monday, Tuesday, Friday shows that we're going to be doing for the next month, we'll also have daily slate breakdowns. So you have the projections in one hand, the full game breakdowns in the other, being able to make a mix of the computer side of things, but also our takes, our info, our research. Mixture of both is the best way to be the best possible player you can be and to win the most amount of money. Appliance season is here, if you will. I got to tell you, the day job is kind of fizzling out for me, so appliance season is very important to me. We need to have a very successful season, and it's been very successful thus far, and bowl season of the college football realm has been very, very good to us as well. So with that being said, let's get into it. There is a $95 Mania qualifier up on DraftKings right now if you are into that. Still plenty of opportunities. This is only qualifier number 6. I love that they are spreading these out like they did last year. In years past, it was like all dumped on us in the last month of the season, so we get that spread out. The flagship tournament, which I will always call the Jam, I don't know why they would ever name it anything else, is the $12, which is 2K up top. I know it's not the best thing in the world, but there is a myriad of single entry options, the 33, everything in there. The head-to-head lobby is heating up. There's a lot of very good stuff on DraftKings to play here. And if you're winding down from the NFL side looking for something to do, look no further. Allow me to be your guide here as we go into the college basketball slate. So what we do here, we'll go game by game, giving a breakdown of each. We'll talk a little bit about relevant players, any mispricing, any overpricing, any sneaks that we may have. And at the end, we'll give a core, usually a 3-man, any prize picks or underdogs or betting opportunities as well. All right. I know most of you are going to be watching this on demand, not live, because I am going on so late. But I will circle back around and read any comments that you drop there while watching on demand. And you can always get at me in DMs at dubdeuces85, pretty much on every relevant social media platform. And those of you who have my phone number, feel free to text me anytime. I'm always willing to talk hoops or football any time of the day. All right, first game on the slate, St. John's versus Xavier. St. John's a 1.5 point favorite, total of 151.5. This is a little bit of an interesting game here. I would say that Xavier, being that they're at home, deserve a little bit of respect here. They do get Zach Freemantle back, who did not start in that game, in Xavier's last game, but did come off the bench. He was unplayable on DK because his price was almost 10K, and we didn't know how many minutes he was going to get. He got 31, and he had a pretty nice game, 16-7. He was only 3K on FanDuel and roughly 2%, so people didn't take the chance, or they just weren't paying attention to the news. But he obviously is going to be getting that full allotment of minutes. Expect him to go right back into the starting lineup, priced at 8.5. Now, on this DK slate, there are some players who are priced way high, or where they should be, but there is a handful that are underpriced clearly and are going to be very highly owned even on 12-game slate because of it. Not saying Freemantle will necessarily be one of those, but at 8.5 playing starter level minutes 30+, he's definitely going to be a solid large field play there that can put up 40+ in this matchup. As far as the rest of Xavier goes, with Freemantle back, it definitely takes guys like Jerome Hunter out of viability. Now, Hunter did play 29 minutes in their last game against Georgetown there. Expect those minutes to kind of get reduced further into the mid-20s. He's priced at 5.4, so can't really use him there. We have seen a tremendous amount of viability from Dante Maddox, but he just played the 20 minutes in their last game. With Freemantle back, he's going to be a much more streaky option off the bench. He's going to have to hit shots. He's going to be kind of a hot hand situation, priced at 4.4 where he is value. But right now I can't project him higher than 18 to 20 minutes, and that's just not going to get it done here, especially against an opportunistic defense like St. John's. Ryan Conwell at 6.8K. His price has steadily been increasing again now that Fremantle's back. I did, with the news of him being there, kind of jumped off of Conwell. He would have been a very nice, strong core play. We had that in our minds last slate, but backed up off of him. And he did have still a pretty sizable shot rate and usage rate, 11 shot attempts there, 7 from long range. So he's still going to get those opportunities, but 6.8 is a little bit of a higher price there. As far as the most playable option, I do think it's Davion McKnight, who's priced there at a nice mid-range 6.5K. I expect him to play 35+ minutes. Do worry about turnovers in this one for him, but he is just a really strong peripherals type guy. So not too keen on the Xavier side necessarily, but he is the most playable Xavier guy to me when factoring in cost. On the St. John side, we have a really big projection breaker play here because rates are absolutely phenomenal for this individual. And basically, when you run through the list of St. John's guys and see how they're priced out, the most expensive player on the team is Davon Smith at 8.9. Which is, in my opinion, way too high priced to be utilizing him. Yes, he did drop a 60 a few games ago right after Christmas, but in conference play, we're looking at a player who's typically going to give us 25 to 30. And when St. John's is healthy and has their full allotment of players, he's just not going to be a guy that's regularly dropping that type of score. even if he puts up the 30 here, like he did last game, I think we can do a little bit better here on this full slate. So nothing against Davon Smith, nothing against Kaderi Richmond. Both of them were great options last year at Utah and Seton Hall, but this is a much more crowded program that they're on now. They can definitely get there, but on a game-to-game basis, much less consistent. Instead, we're going to look at R.J. Lewis. Guard forward eligibility priced at 7.8, coming off a 42. Now, Lewis is a bit of a fouler. He gets aggressive. He'll pick up those 2 fouls, sometimes 3 in the first half. But he's really good in the second half about not picking them up. So the main thing here with Lewis is you hope he doesn't pick those 2 up early in the game. As long as he sees 30-plus minutes, he is going to absolutely shatter this 7.8 price. 19 shots against Butler, 15 against Creighton. This is one of those players I would expect to see a really high ownership on, especially in high dollar single entry and the Mania Q itself. Lewis has a 29.1% shot rate, a 27.7% usage rate, a defensive rebounding rate of 17.5%, a steal rate of 3.5%. He's drawing over 5 fouls per 40. It's just every game when you watch St. John's, Lewis is always on the rebound. He's always getting steals. Taking every shot. There's just no shots he doesn't like. And he gets there without making a tremendous amount of threes as well. He's shooting about 23% from long range, which isn't great on 47 attempts. He will take them, but he's just so active. And you generally have a pretty strong floor with him. Now, he did struggle against Creighton, but he took 15 shots in that game. He had a relatively mediocre game against Georgia because of the early foul trouble, but took 13 shots in that game. There's just so much volume coming from Lewis in a close game. And being that this is on Xavier's floor, not St. John's, and Zach Fremantle is back, and the spread is only 1.5 points, we can expect Lewis to be playing a ton of minutes in this one. Zubi Ejiofor at 8.4. He's more expensive. He'll be less owned. That is your kind of pivot play away from the chalk. We love Zubi too. I like his matchup against the Xavier front court. I expect him to get guys like Jerome Hunter into foul trouble quite fast. The main thing with Zubi is he's been a little bit out of control here in the conference play as well, picking up fouls, but has been an elite rebounder, putting up roughly 30 to 32 fantasy points in conference play. So definitely a playable look. If this wasn't a large 12-game slate, which I love, by the way, you could run a mini St. John's stack, and you still can. You can commit to this game and run multiple St. John's guys, and I think it's going to work out just fine. But there is enough action in these other games that we're going to want exposure to, so we don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into the first game so hard. But R.J. Lewis is definitely a guy that is going to be in the majority of my lineups at that price point. And when you look at the early projections, without editing, we have to add some box scores and stuff. At 31 minutes, we have him at almost 5x. So I would expect anyone that's a regular player of CBB DFS to be all over him as well. Other options we can look at that are even cheaper. Simeon Wilcher at 5.2. He got pulled against Butler, so don't love that. Has been a starter for the most part, playing 30-plus minutes. Probably too difficult to utilize him in a main lineup just yet, but that is a price that makes me pay attention. Aaron Scott at 4.4 played 26 minutes against Butler at the behest of Simeon Wilcher. We have been seeing him play low 20s for the most part, but that 4.4 price is definitely good for a player who was so good for North Texas in the past. Going through some growing pains here as the team gets acclimated and builds out a pecking order. There's a lot of ball-dominant alphas on this team from their previous program, so it's taken time for that to kind of develop. And Aaron Scott has been a tough adjustment for him. But that price of 4.4, definitely something that I want to look at. All right, we're going to try not to harp too long on each game. I know I have a tendency to be long-winded, so we're going to try to move along here as much as we can for a 12-gamer. Love large slates. Love large slates, in case that wasn't clear. Pittsburgh versus Duke. Duke 14.5-point favorite. Total of 143.5. I got to give it to Duke, man. Early in the season, after Con Knipple, at low rostership, did some things for us the first couple of games. People talking glowingly about Duke and people asking me, like, what's the deal here? Normally we all hate Duke, and that is the truth. I made the comment that this is the most likable Duke team, I think, of my life. I can't remember a more likable Duke team. Maybe the Jahlil Okafor season, But man, there's just like, for Cooper Flag, the guy doesn't show a lot of emotion. He's even keeled. When he's having a bad game, you can't tell. When he's having a good game, you can't tell by his emotions. Like, he's just out there, just robotic, Terminator-esque. I love it. Colin Knippel and his family, he's got brothers who are going to come through this program. Really solid. Tyrese Proctor's benefiting a great deal. Like, this Duke team, I'm really trying, guys, but I can't find myself disliking this Duke team. And the way that they just absolutely decimated SMU, a very good SMU team, on their floor at SMU, 89-62. My man Matt Cross, he did okay, but that was just a really, really tough game for SMU. And Duke, typically throughout the years, we've seen like, there's got these one and done freshmen, so they got to get acclimated. It takes them time. They drop games early in the season they shouldn't, and then as you get closer, midway through conference play, they start going straight surgical, and they can't be beaten. Obviously, in the tournaments, we've seen Duke get beaten a lot. We do love that, but this team's already come together early in the conference season, and I think we're going to see a lot of Duke just absolutely annihilating their conference foes. 82-56 win over Georgia Tech, 88-65 win over Virginia Tech. Granted, the ACC has some bad teams. Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech, they're not very good this year. SMU, they're pretty good, and they're loaded. Their roster is loaded, and they were no match for Duke. So this is going to be a season in which I think Duke is just absolutely massive throughout their conference, and just they're not going to lose too many conference games. They'll have off nights, sure, everyone does, but this is a big spread here for Duke against Pittsburgh. 14.5 points. I would have, before the SMU game, I would have been like, no way, I'm not seeing that. I'm going to bet that. But after the way they undressed SMU, I'm not so sure. Now, it does help for Pitt. They got their guy Ish Leggett back after he missed one game with an ankle issue. 21-6 against Stanford. A good win, 83-68 against Stanford. He's priced there at 8-1, which is very playable. Jalan Lowe is all the way up at 9-5. I don't think we can get there with him. He's been pretty damn good, playing just about every single minute. He and Leggett, the top two players on the team, highest usage. With Leggett back, it does make Brandon Cummings pretty unplayable. He is priced at 4-8, dropped back down after just 13 minutes against Stanford. So you might look at him and be like, man, there's some upside there, but he's just not going to get enough minutes. Even if it turns into a blowout, I just don't see it with Brandon Cummings. So we're not going to look too much at any of these Pitt guys. You do have Guillermo Diaz-Graham at 4-6, which is pretty interesting, coming off of 30 against Stanford. But this is much more difficult, obviously, against Duke. He played 33 minutes in that Stanford game. We've been seeing him play roughly 21, 22, 25. His projection at 33, 34 is obviously way better at 4-6. But can we sit here and say that for sure he's going to play those kind of minutes on Duke when he possibly could get into foul trouble? We'll see. It's definitely an interesting price there. If you're an MME player or you've got a bunch of alt lineups and GPPs that you can run, Guillermo Diaz-Graham is definitely one that I would look to. I would not use him in my single entry stuff. My man Tubby in the house. I was in a negative money. Silly foul. 2 overtimes later. I'm 3x. Gotta love CBB. Well, there you go. These short slates are just, they're such a lottery, right? You're coin flipping for everything, but it's nice when overtime works in your favor. That's for sure. See if we can get some overtime games here. But yeah, this is a likable Duke team. That's all I got to say. On the Duke side here, I've said every time there is a Duke slate, Cooper Flag, if he's 10K or less, you just plug him in. You don't even think about it. He's 10-2, so technically we'll see. We have enough cheapies on this slate and guys in the 5-6K range that we can make Cooper Flag work. I'm a little bit worried about fading him at this point. I will pull up the pay-up list here. I do this every time we talk about Flag. You have Cam Jones there against Georgetown at 10-3. He's been just about as automatic as Brooks Barnhizer has been. I know Barnhizer had a bad game last time out. You have Javon Small up over 10K. He's been great. But Norchad Omier, we know how good he can be, but we, really haven't been rostering Norchad, and it hasn't hurt us. Thomas Sorber, who's been great, but we know Marquette's interior defense is much better than it should be. And then you have the list of Jalan Lowe, Josh Jefferson of Iowa State, that's really expensive price for him. Florida guys, Clayton and Elisha Martin. Like the pay ups to me really obviously it looks like you got to take one of Cam Jones or Cooper Flag. And again, there's enough 5-6K value for us to make that happen. So love Cooper Flag in this spot. In conference play, they've shown even if it's a blowout, they're going to play him 30 plus minutes. Earlier in the season, we saw him under 30 against non-conference opponents or, bottom 300 Ken Palm teams. Expect him to kind of flirt with 40 here as a floor, upside for much more. And I think he gets to the foul line a shit ton in this game. As far as anyone else on Duke, Zion James has been a pretty good play projection-wise. He's now up there at 6K. Now that he's back up to that range, kind of pull the cord on him a little bit. He's not anywhere near a priority. Does have strong peripheral stats. When he's in that 5K range, he's definitely a guy getting those starter level minutes, but has risen enough to where we can kind of look elsewhere. For 400 less, you do have Tyrese Proctor, who has scored 25 plus DK points in back-to-back games. Really like Proctor. Dating back to 2 years ago, myself and a lot of bigger media pundits had projected him to be a breakout star. Didn't quite work out for him, but he's turned himself into a really good college player. And nobody talks about him like they used to, especially not now with Flag, Knipple, and some of these other guys that Duke has. But you look at it, he's really solidified himself as the third option on the team most games. Now that Jeremy Roach isn't there, he's initiating offense, playing off ball there, using him in a myriad of ways. And his minutes are solidified, and he's playing 30 plus. So at 5'6", he's very much in play as well. It was actually surprising that at 5K last slate, he barely had much rostership, but even 600 more, I'm still very much involved with Tyrese Proctor. As far as the front court options go, they're all cheap. Come on, Malowak at 5'3". Not a lot of upside there because his minutes will fluctuate depending on the circumstance. Pittsburgh's front court, they've got some size, but they're very undisciplined. So I think there'll be a lot of foul issues on that side. Malik Brown at 4K, that's a GBP look there. Hasn't been playing as many minutes. I don't think his toe issue is really where it needs to be yet. The game against SMU did tune in there a bit, and I saw him grimacing a bunch of times, so that's a little bit worrisome there. We'll back off of him. And then you do have Caleb Foster at 3.8. If it turns into a blowout and you want a GPP type of play that's going to be sub 2% owned, Caleb Foster, former starter, played big minutes, prime candidate to transfer after the year, can give you 15 to 18 there, especially if he's taking 6, 7, 8 shots like he was against SMU. But certainly not a main team play by any means. All right, next game on the slate, Clemson versus Louisville. We're on the ACC stretch here. Louisville, 3.5-point favorites, total of 145.5. Who would have thunk it? Louisville, when you get a decent coach in there, you can win some games. And now Louisville is favored against a really good Clemson team that is probably going to be one of the few representatives in the tournament from the ACC. Louisville currently 10-5 here under Pat Kelsey, but they've won 4 in a row, which includes wins against Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida State. Ken Palm has this a 1-point game in favor of Louisville. Now, Louisville has the short rotation, which is great. Overall, they are running 7 to 8 guys. They did get a nice boost there from Abakor Traore, who played 16 minutes off the bench against Virginia, had a huge game, 15 points, 8 rebounds. That game turned into a massive blowout because Virginia is Virginia. Long gone are the title-winning Virginia Cavaliers. I do see a sizable amount of ownership going his way because of that. He missed time there because of the arm issue. It seemed like he might be out for a majority of the season, but there's all these injuries where they're talking about guys being out long-term. Seemingly they're coming back faster. I hope there's no long-term effects on whatever cortisone-like concoction that they've come up with to get these kids back so quickly. But Traore certainly looking like he deserves 20-plus minutes if he can handle it. Clemson has some size in that front court. They'll need Traore's rebounding ability and his toughness. So he only played 9 minutes against North Carolina, but he ripped down 6 rebounds there. And then early in the season, he had a pretty dynamic 24 fantasy point game with just 3 real points. So he does not need to score. And when you look through the Louisville roster, they definitely need him. Noah Waterman, more of a finesse forward, not going to be banging down low. I know he has some bigger rebound games, but that's not really his style. And James Scott is still in need of some development. I like James Scott a lot at 5K. I think he will be really low owned, people ignoring him. 8+ rebounds in 3 straight games. He's seemingly getting better with each game that passes by. Don't sleep on James Scott. He's certainly a playable look there. Chucky Hepburn's a bit expensive at 8.7 for me, so I'm not necessarily going there. He needs a ton of steals to really hit that upside. Can't rely on that too much. Terrence Edwards, probably my favorite player on Louisville, but he's priced at 6.7. Guard forward eligibility. Needed to get down a little bit more. He's struggling with a shot right now. 2 of 9 against Virginia, 2 of 12 against North Carolina. I had him pegged for a monster game against North Carolina because I thought he would grab 8+ rebounds. That didn't happen. 34 minutes, only 15 fantasy points, but he definitely has upside. Against FSU, we saw him drop 19, 7, and 8. Flirted with a triple-double there, 42. He's a nice GPP look here as well. On the Clemson side, it's just basically Ian Schifflin, who has chalked throughout the first month of the season. Pricing has really come up on him. We're still seeing people pay over 9K. He's kind of settled in there. Still can rely on him for a 30, 35 fantasy point mark at 8.8. That'll get the job done. He has been a tremendous rebounder overall. Looking at his rates, 26% defensive rebounding rate, which is top 50, and a combined rebounding rate of 38%, shooting about 33% from long range as well. Schifflin operating kind of in that Hunter Tyson role from a couple of seasons ago, and he's really done a good job controlling his fouls as well. I think he's going to go lower owned. I like him quite a bit, but not enough to make my main, and I think a lot of people are going to share that opinion. And that just kind of means he's a nice large field look there, or in the qualifier, because he definitely could throw down a 40+. And you mentioned overtime there. This is a game to me that screams overtime if we do see one. These two teams are extremely evenly matched. The fact that Clemson is getting 3.5 points, to me, that feels like a strong bet. I think Louisville ultimately will win this game, but I think we're talking about a 1-2 point game. So this is a betting opportunity for what it's worth. Outside of Schifflin, you have the appropriately priced Chase Hunter at 7.4, Victor Lakin at 6.7. He has had some up and down performances. He is the very definition of a tournament option, shot blocking machine. Definitely like his physicality going up against Louisville. This is the player in particular that they're going to need Abacor Traore on the floor against. If not, I could see Larkin having a very big game. Don't love using him on the road, though, because he does have foul issues, and that is a problem, and I'm already getting tired of it. The first month of the season, we escaped most foul issues, and it's like, this is going to be a great college basketball season. And the last 2 weeks of the season, we have just been taking it in the shorts when it comes to foul trouble. So I'm trying to be smart about that where possible. Dylan Hunter's value at 3.9, playing roughly 20 to 25 minutes. He doesn't have any ceiling there, but what do you really need from him at that 3.9 price? If he's playing 24 minutes, he'll do just enough as their sixth man. In the last game, they started Christian Reeves, the 7'2" center, sophomore, 250 pounds, not well coordinated. He played just the 8 minutes. They went with a smaller lineup there. Larkin actually came off the bench in that one. I would expect that start to swap, and they're still going to continue to run Wiggins, Zachary, Hunter, and Schifflin in the other 4 spots. But Hunter is that sixth man playing the rest of those minutes. Jake Heidbreder and Del Jones getting the rest of the minutes off the bench. Heidbreder was looking like a potential value steal there for a while, priced only at 3.9. He had played 26 minutes against South Carolina, 22 against Wake Forest, and 17 against Stanford, but he played just the 6 against Cal, so really can't trust him. But I know the minutes will be there for Hunter, and I don't imagine many people rostering him either. Why do I think that? Because I've rostered him 3 times this season, and he's been below 5% each and every one of those times. Again, no real upside there, but if he gets to the 15, 16 mark, we're feeling pretty good about that, and he's definitely going to have enough minutes to get there. So that is my Clemson look. Moving on here, Georgia Tech versus Syracuse, total of 156. The 'Cuse is a 1.5 point favorite. I would take anyone against the 'Cuse ordinarily in a betting scenario. I'm not too high on Syracuse right now, but I'm also very low on Georgia Tech. This is one where I think we just take the total and we run. Over 156 seems like a mortal lock. Georgia Tech is a team that finds themselves in these high-scoring affairs more often than not over the last couple of years, and we usually see them in games that end up in overtime as well. Syracuse has no players above 6K on DraftKings. Expect a lot of Syracuse ownership across the board for all your opponents' lineups. And then on the Georgia Tech side, the most expensive player being Nathan George at 7K. Not really there, but Bayandongo at 6'8", great GBP look. He has really struggled this year with fouls, and that has impacted his minutes a tremendous amount, but there is several other options here on Tech that we can look at. But let's start with Syracuse, who did get J.J. Starling back. He played 32 minutes against FSU, 12 points, 3 assists, and a rebound, shot 5 of 16. He is priced at 5.4K. This is a player who is typically priced above 7K. Going up against Georgia Tech, I usually like to wait a few games. This is why I didn't roster him on the last Syracuse slate, because guys coming off of injury, sometimes it takes a bit. Got burned tonight on Dylan Harper, who was still very sick. We get lulled into these, guys come back one day after the flu. They come back 3 weeks after a torn ACL. I'm obviously being sarcastic about that. So you get used to guys just coming back and performing like nothing happened. So didn't expect Dylan Harper to be that sick, but that norovirus going around is no joke. But anyways, I typically wait to see a guy play a couple of games and make sure, okay, he's ready. But they did start JJ right away, played those 32 minutes. There's no reason to think that he can't play another 30-plus minutes in a favorable matchup against Georgia Tech, priced at 5.4K. Missed a month of the season. That is a lot. But you guys know before he got injured, he was putting up 30-plus fantasy points with regularity. Hard not to want to use him at 5.4K. That's an extreme value price there on him. This will knock out guys like Jaquan Carlos, played 19 minutes against FSU. So, he's going to go, in the pile there in the reserve. He did still start, but he's just going to be off the ball a lot more. Shot attempts aren't going to be there. He's just going to be a lot less hands-on. Starting lineup we can expect based off of last game: Starling, Carlos, Lampkin, Freeman, and then we still saw Lucas Taylor, the senior transfer from Wake Forest and Georgia State. He did get the start, played 29 minutes. Without Starling, the last 3 games, he played 23-plus minutes off the bench, and it culminated in that game against Wake Forest. His former team, he played 36 minutes in that 81-71 loss, 16 points as he knocked down 3 triples, 5 rebounds. He was very good in that one. Earned the start in this one. He is priced at 4.5, so definitely a value piece if he remains in the starting lineup. He's definitely not a guy that I'm going to sit here and jam into my lineups and think that he's going to give me some kind of 6x return. But at 4.5, he can definitely give us that 16 to 18 number. But it's only 900 more for J.J. Starling, and I don't know how comfortable I am with a straight-up Syracuse stack. This is a game with the pricing that would warrant multiple pieces, at least one Georgia Tech, at least one Syracuse. The freshman Donovan Freeman at 5'9", that's a pretty interesting price. I'm not quite sure why he's so cheap going up against this Georgia Tech team. He kind of looks like a one and done at times, and other times it's like, damn, this kid's really raw. I would not mind playing him and Starling together. Freeman's rates have been fantastic. 24% usage rate, 26% shot rate. He has the 12th highest defensive rebounding rate in the country at 30.2%, draws 5 fouls per 40. And it's even more impressive when you consider the fact that he plays in a front court with Eddie Lampkin. Big boy Eddie Lampkin, who is a great rebounder in his own right. And we've known that throughout the course of his career through TCU, Colorado, all of those stops. He has a combined rebounding rate over 28%, usage rate over 21%. He hasn't been as consistent. Fouls have been an issue. I think he's going to get him and Bayandongo are going to be battling physically. If Lampkin can get close to 30 minutes, paying off 5.6 seems like a very strong possibility. But if he does get in that early foul trouble, this price will quickly look not so cheap if he can't stay on the floor. But between him and Freeman, I would lean Freeman there, especially when they're so close in price now. Freeman and Starling we're used to seeing over 7K. So good discounts there. Elijah Moore set the world on fire. He's a freshman. He has been going through those freshman struggles. Only 3 minutes there with JJ Starling, so we don't have to worry about him. He was a starter for a big portion of Starling being out, and he was very viable, but he's definitely going through some struggles here as they play in-conference opponents. Chris Bell, who inexplicably has huge games. His minutes have been all over the place. You really can't use him. He had priced, above 7K at one point this year. No thanks, Jair Davis, Kyle Cuffey, all role players. On slates where the pricing would be tighter and we need to kind of make some tougher decisions, Kyle Cuffey would be a whole lot more appealing. But on a large slate like this, where we have a couple mispriced guys on his very own team, we don't necessarily have to look there. One shout for the future being like next season. Petar Mastrovic, if he doesn't transfer, he's going to be a really great big next season. Love Mastrovic's game, and he's really tailor-made more for like the Mountain West, but he's going to be really good wherever he's at. All right, on the Georgia Tech side, Bayandongo I mentioned at 6'8", GPP look. Lance Taylor, very appealing price at 6'4". These are all guys that I don't mind getting to, but the real prize is Javion McCullen at 5'2". He has been back for a handful of games now, working through that ankle issue. He has scored 35-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games against the likes of Notre Dame and Boston College. Expect him to have another big game here against Syracuse. The only worrisome part is he's been getting there because he's scoring a ton. Took 13 shots against Notre Dame, got to the foul line a ton. Over the last 2 games, 11 trips to the foul line. He is shooting a really solid number. If he gets to the foul line, he is not missing them, where he's shooting 92% at the current time. But the big thing is that he's playing those kind of minutes now. They're comfortable enough, and he's obviously healthy enough working his way through that ankle injury. They've kind of messed with the starting lineup at times. Right now, it looks like an 8-man, possibly 9-man rotation. They're still bringing McCollum off the bench where he played those 30 minutes. Nathan George, Lance Terry, Bayandago, Jaden Mustaf, talented freshman, Ryan Mutombo, then McCollum, Duncan Powell, and Ibrahim Sore. So even if McCollum doesn't start, you don't have to be alarmed. I still expect him to play a big chunk of minutes, have him tentatively placed at about 28 right now, and that might be on the conservative side. Like the freshman Jaden Mustaf at 5'3", he is your GPP pivot. I expect a lot of people to be on McCollum there because of that cheap price. He should be at 7K at this point. Mustaf definitely has a high upside in his bag. He hasn't really shown it as much against higher competition here at the ACC level. But just knowing in GBPs that McCollum's probably going to be above 25%, Mustaf under 5 gives you some leverage there built in this game alone. And as part of game stacks, I like Mustaf as well. Duncan Powell there at 4'6" does represent a value piece. He's been playing steadily 24 to 25 minutes off the bench. He has eclipsed 20 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. So he's also a viable candidate here for your lineups. Kwesi Reeves, not quite to the level of being back. We're still 2 weeks out before he's realistically going to return. So you don't have to worry about him too much. And then Luke O'Brien, who is dealing with the foot issue. He's been in and out there. I'm not expecting him back either, but we'll see. Even if he does, I'm not sure that he would instantly play 20-plus minutes, so I'm not that concerned. And those minutes for him aren't going to come at the Javion McCollum expense. It'll come out of Duncan Powell's or Ibrahim Sore. One of those guys will lose minutes. It won't be Javion McCollum. So McCollum and Starling in this game, absolutely dirt cheap. All right, next game on the slate here, Arizona versus West Virginia. Arizona 2-point favorites, total of 143.5. Let's take a moment here. West Virginia, man, they have something brewing. Darian DeVries is an amazing coach. He has his West Virginia team at 11-2. They've won 7 straight games. There was a stretch in end of November, 3 straight games in overtime, beating Gonzaga. Like, everyone thought that was a fluke, myself included. Like, wow, how'd they do that? Also beat Arizona in overtime there. That was the non-con tournament. Counted as a non-con game. That was in overtime. They've beaten Georgetown. They've beaten Kansas, missing Tucker DeVries. they've beaten Oklahoma State. Like, this West Virginia team is the real deal. And you got to really look at Darian DeVries and say, like, dude, this guy might be one of the best coaches in the conference. Drake winning games without him, but they've lost their last two. They're starting to kind of hit a wall a little bit. Darian DeVries has done a great job. When you look at the lineup that he's utilizing to do so, it's even more impressive. Javon Small, who has taken the entire team on his back pretty much and is priced accordingly at over 10K. The freshman Jonathan Powell, who I really like, Sincere Harris, Toby Okane, and Eduardo Andre. That is the starting lineup they've gone with. Now, Amani Hansberry did return here after he's been dealing with his own issues, came off the bench against Oklahoma State, played 13 minutes. So we'll see if he slides back into the starting role there over Okani. They certainly need his height. Joseph Yesefu, KJ Tenner are the other bench pieces that they have available right now. Dealing with all of these injuries, they have no business to continue winning games. And Tucker DeVries doesn't seem like he's going to be available here. We'll see. That upper body injury, getting him back would be a welcome sight. But hey, they haven't had him, and they're still winning games. Javon Small is priced at 10-1. That's a pretty difficult price for me to get to. He's been fantastic. He has been absolutely great playing every single minute. A lot of his numbers have been propped up by steals, especially earlier in the season. So he hasn't been a player that I've been looking to, but he's 22 rebounds in his last two games combined against the likes of Oklahoma State, who has a very good rebounding front court, and Kansas, who has Hunter Dickinson. So those are impressive numbers for a guard like Javon Small. Johnny Powell's come up. He's there at 5K. He hasn't been putting up huge numbers. He's been hovering right around 4X at this price. So there's not a lot of upside there for him, but he is playing a tremendous amount of minutes. So if Tucker's out, you can still look to him. The big news will be Amani Hansberry. If he starts, he's a pretty big slam dunk play at 4.7. We know his fantasy point per minute number is outstanding. He's really developed quickly in this West Virginia system and become a go-to guy for them. Usage rate of 24%. Shot rate of 24%. He's shooting about 27% from long range on 42 attempts. Now, I know 27% is not great, but it's enough for defenses to make the recognition like we got to pick him up. Combined rebounding rate over 27% as well, drawing about 3.5 fouls per 40. So he was really cheap at the beginning of the season, then he got really expensive really quick because of how good he was playing. If he starts at 4.7, I'm just plugging him in. The game against Arizona earlier this year, 13 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists for 32.5 fantasy points. That was 38 minutes in the overtime period. So sign me up there for Amani. Other options, the guys are getting priced up. Eduardo Andre at 5.5. These are still cheap prices if guys are out, like Hansberry, if he's limited. Tucker's out. Like, you can still look to him, especially Andre, who's been smashing. He put up 34 against Kansas, 32 against Mercyhurst, and then 28 against Oklahoma State. So he's been producing. Those stats are great at 5.5, but I do want to pump the brakes on him a little bit. He has shown himself to be a solid fantasy point per minute player in the past. But I just want to see where we stand there with Hansberry in his start. Same can be said about Toby Okani at 5.3 and Sincere Harris at 5.1, who had a really nice game against Oklahoma State as well. So playable options galore at West Virginia. On Arizona, you have Caleb Love leading the way at 9K. You know what to expect with Caleb Love, right? If you got the 60 from him against TCU, good for you. If you went back against Cincinnati, you only got 25. Caleb Love's been in college for a long time. By now, there's nothing I can tell you that will be anything that you don't already know about Caleb Love. Roster with caution. I do like KJ Lewis at 4.6. He hasn't been starting, but he's playing starter minutes off the bench. This is a good spot for him going up against a West Virginia team that, defensively, they've got it going on, but they do turn it over as well. And I like KJ Lewis's ability to get to the rack here against them, especially in a game where we could see a surplus amount of possessions. So I do like KJ Lewis at 4.6. That feels like a real cheap price for him, and I think people are going to gloss over him. And then we have to make the recognition about some bench pieces here for Arizona that I think they're going to have to get into the starting lineup soon if something doesn't change. And that's Carter Bryant and Henry Visar. Freshman Carter Bryant, sophomore Henry Visar. Right now, they're still starting Trey Townsend and Toba Waka. Townsend, just it doesn't make much sense for him not to be playing better. We've seen him against upper tier competition throughout his Oakland career just smash. It has to be a system issue here for Trey Townsend. Oakland more free flowing, more getting him the ball and getting out of the way type stuff. That doesn't happen here in Arizona. And he's just not fitting in well. And we're not seeing him put up these big numbers very often. If you would tell me at 4'6", Trey Townsend, last year I'd be all over it. The whole industry would be, but he's really not playable at 4'6", and his minutes are starting to diminish because of it, regardless of starting or not. Might not be that much longer we see him start coming off the bench. Same can be said about Tobe. Remains in the starting spot, but his minutes are starting to dwindle down there. I like Tobe. He has upside at this price of 4.4, but there's young players behind him knocking on the door. And I've said for the last couple of weeks now, Carter Bryant deserves more time when he's out. And he got some starts too. A couple of weeks ago, we did see him get some starts, but minutes were all over the place. Very active, gets after it on the glass, and he's a willing passer as a big man. I love the way Carter Bryant plays. Still very young, undeveloped. A lot to still go there with him. His game's going to be outstanding next year, and if they continue to play him 20-plus minutes, we could see that development happen a lot sooner as well. Do like him at 4.1. I'll stop short of saying he's a main team value, but he's pretty damn close. Minutes are what's stopping us there. Now, Henry Visar played 26 minutes against Cincinnati off the bench. If he starts, he's the lock of all locks of the value slate, and everybody else will roster him too. If he doesn't start, it's hit or miss. He is one of those players, fantasy point per minute guys that I harp about, and he's been that way throughout. And once Mo Krivas went down, it was like, these minutes are going to go somewhere. Why not Henry? And they did. 26 against Cincy. He put up 8 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals, 32 fantasy points. The game before that, and a close win over TCU in 18 minutes, 15 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, and 1 block. 31 fantasy points. He scored 19 plus in 3 of his last 4. He has done this several times. 27 against Old Dominion, 25 against Davidson. He has shown himself to be very productive in short stints. If you are going to give him 26 minutes again, Tommy Lloyd, please let us know, because he is a stupid lock. Anyone fading a starting Henry Visar that is expected to play 26 minutes is an absolute fish. Now, it's a kind of play that I feel like a lot of people will be on, and of course, he's going to get 5 minutes and brick on us. But let's just kind of drive this point home here. At 26 minutes, Mr. Visar, we have him at 23.5 fantasy points, just over 5.6 gigs. Now, let's tentatively say 20. 20 minutes work for you guys? 4.3. So this is just a really great value spot here. Reading the tea leaves, seeing how Tobe's minutes are dropping, Trey Townsend's minutes are dropping. There's no Mo Krivas. He only played 3 minutes against West Virginia in that tourney game, so we can't really derive anything from that. He's a great play. As far as anybody else, Jaden Bradley's there at 5.5. Not really too interested in him either. But this is a game I want exposure to, no doubt about it. Dom plays. I don't know if I saw you last show, Dom plays, and I got to tell you, man, hurt my heart. No, I'm just kidding. You usually are there. I know I've been going on later lately, so that's on me. But it's good to see you. Getting off work. Any one game caught your eye for tomorrow? Yeah. There is one in particular. Tulane plus 8.5 against UAB. I'm not going to harp on it too much because we have so many games to talk about, but that is one that feels extremely advantageous to me on the Tulane side at plus 8.5. Looking through the games there, picking a few out, that was one that stuck out right away. And also Nebraska plus 3.5, who traditionally isn't great on the road, but they're facing an Iowa team that refuses to play defense. And Kamari McGee of Wisconsin said so himself. Which is pretty wild when you think about it, coming out and saying this team didn't want to play defense. They haven't played defense under Coach McCaffrey in decades. All right. Good to see you, though. I appreciate it. Florida versus Tennessee. Florida 2.5 point favorites. Uh-oh. in a total of 148.5. Let's see what the old Ken Pom machine has to say about this one. This, of all the games going on tomorrow, and there are a lot of good ones to watch, this is the one that is must see. Ken Pom has it 74-73 in favor of the Vols. It is a home game for the Gators. Third most efficient offense in the country. Fifth in offensive rebounding efficiency, coming off a 106-100 loss to Kentucky. This was the first game on Saturday. It was 30 minutes before the slate started, and I know a lot of people, if the game's not on the slate, they're not paying attention to it. But this was one, as a basketball fan, if you didn't watch it, you should go back and see some of it because it was incredible. Both these teams offensively were just absolutely going nuke. Now, going up against Tennessee, a much better defense this year than Kentucky. I'm not expecting both teams to put up 100, but Florida is going to have to figure things out here defensively against a team like the Vols, because if they get into a high-scoring affair with the Vols, Chaz Lanier especially, I think this would be another game in which they would lose. Pulling that box up real quick, Elijah Martin had 26. Walter Clayton had 33. It was basically a two-man show there. They were just hitting shot after shot. Clayton hit 6 threes. Martin hit 5. It was just a ridiculous game to watch. Much more balanced effort from Kentucky, but the star there was Kobe Brea, who hit 7 threes of his own. And then somebody in the Kentucky stands handed him a baby. It's very strange, but he was carrying a baby around the court after the game. But that was a fun one. 3-point shooting galore. Tennessee much better in that regard. They are one of the best 3-point defenses in the country, so they will definitely challenge Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin. I do have not a hard rule, but a rule nonetheless. I try not to target against Tennessee if I can help it very much. And those big performances by Clayton and Martin got their prices jammed way up, as you'd imagine. Martin at 9.2, Clayton at 9.6. Those are going to be tougher prices for me to get to. Condon is somebody I've wanted for the last 2 seasons to really get going. He has put up 26 plus in 3 of his last 4. Huge game against UNC. All bigs usually do. Front court players versus UNC, we know. And then he had the 7.10 rebound game there against Kentucky, which was at 26. Tennessee front court, no joke either. Defensively, it'll be a physical game. Condon does have the benefit of being at home, but I worry about fouls with him. And then you have the eternal chalk, Will Richard, who's 6'7". That's probably a price I'm fine with going away from. If he's super chalky on this slate again, I'm just okay with that. I don't think he will be. He's been pretty damn good against P4, P5 competition and playing 35-plus minutes. So he's probably the best option on Florida just because the defense is going to be looking at the other options here, like Martin, like Clayton, and leaving Richard with probably the worst of the defense. On the Tennessee side, Chaz Lanier is priced at 8.6. It's a pretty tough price to get to there for a guy who's mainly going to be relying on his scoring, but he has asserted himself. He has taken the Dalton Connect role. He has been absolutely ridiculous. 29 real against Arkansas. They completely embarrassed Arkansas there, 76-52. 29 points and 2 rebounds. Put up 33. So you like at 8.6, 9K, these high prices, if a guy's going to put up 29 real, you'd like to think that he can hit 40 with ease, maybe even 50. He put up 24 real game before that. He had 38, so close. Against Middle Tennessee, 23 real. He put up 35. So it's a little bit tougher for me to pay that price for Chaz Lanier. I do like taking guys against Florida. They've been a little bit more fantasy friendly, but Lanier's more of a luxury play than a necessity. Zakai Ziegler at 8K, that's a much more intriguing price to me for him because we know he's much more well-rounded. 15 assists against Middle Tennessee a few weeks ago. Arkansas game 12-5-7. Like, that was the type of game I would expect from Ziegler as a floor, and that puts him right around 34 to 35 fantasy points here at 8K. So we'll take that all day long from him. He did struggle in that game against Illinois. He fouled out in 24 minutes, which is pretty uncharacteristic of him. But when you look through the other games against similar competition, he has put up well over 30 fantasy points against the likes of Baylor, Louisville, Syracuse, Miami, these types of teams. I know those teams are worse than Florida, but work with me here on the P4 element. and doesn't have to shoot a bunch to get there. So definitely like Zeigler at 8K, much more willing to get there than I am Lanier. I don't think that I will get to either though because of the way that I'm looking at Cooper Flag and some of these other 7K range guys, but he's certainly in play. Igor Milicic at 7-1. It's too high for me against the Florida front court, but he put a 50 against Arkansas, so don't sleep on what Igor can do, 13 and 18. Probably not pulling down that many rebounds against Florida, but still very integral piece to this team. And then you have the value pieces all under 5K. Jordan Gainey, who is playing really solid minutes at 25 to 26. I do like him quite a bit at 4.8. Think he can pay that off. Jemiah Mashak, the finger injury didn't keep him out against Arkansas. He played 22 minutes. He was fine, put up 17. So he's certainly in play as well. And then you have Felix Akpara, who's all the way down at 4.2. His price has tumbled. He's just not a offensive weapon for this team, and he's losing out rebounds to the Igor Milicic machine, and we're seeing Zakai also rebound a lot as well. But at 4.2, as a starter, he's much more reasonable play than he was just over the weekend at 5.3. So don't be so quick to write off Felix, but he's a lower end value. And Darlinston Dubar, it's not working out for him. Started the season off, with injuries and the concussion, and he just doesn't look like himself, what we're used to seeing from his Hofstra days. And that's a damn shame, because if we could get the Hofstra version of Darlinston Dubar, that would be obviously a steal at 3-3, but it would also make this Tennessee team pretty damn unbeatable, and they might actually be unbeatable as of this moment right now. Tennessee versus Auburn is going to be one hell of a final stretch for the SEC, but they need Dubar, so we'll see if he can start to get some more minutes here. All right, Georgia versus Kentucky. Kentucky 2.5-point favorites, total of 155. Kentucky coming off that really big win over Florida. Prices are all pretty reasonable for the most part. Andrew Carr is my favorite Kentucky play, and he typically is. 6'9" is definitely a fine price for him, but he's one of those, like, if he fits, fine, like last man in, but we're not starting our lineups with him. We still are seeing a pretty deep rotation for Kentucky where they're going to rotate through, even though they've got some injuries at different spots. Lamont Butler, Otega Awe, Jackson Robinson, Kobe Brea through the perimeter, and then Andrew Carr, Amari Williams, Brandon Garrison, and to a lesser extent, Ansley Almanor through the front court. Brandon Garrison's only 3.7. We really liked him. Was the game against Colgate. He came through mostly with 17. Just doesn't get enough minutes, but that 3.7 price is really interesting for him going up against Georgia. Going to have to stay out of foul trouble in the minutes that he does get. He's going to have to be extremely active, but he is worth a dart throw. The official listing on Kobe Brea is questionable, but I think that he's going to play. I'd be surprised. He was walking around with a baby. He was kissing babies like a presidential candidate after the game. So we'll see. He had that huge game. He's priced at 5.2. It doesn't really change a lot for his playability. I'm not really on him, especially when we have Javion McCollum at the same price. But it does push me more towards a Jackson Robinson, who would play probably like 35 minutes without Kobe Brea. Otega Awe would play 34 to 35 minutes without him as well. Like, we'd start looking at some of those options. Robinson's at 6.4, Otega at 6.8. Those prices aren't particularly great for them, but more minutes and more opportunities. And then you have Lamont Butler at the top of the mountain, sitting there at 7.7, coming off of 40 against Florida. He has really shown up against upper tier competition, but this is a bit of an excessive price for me. You can see there's certain players who are like, what were they thinking? These guys are way too cheap. And then you got other prices on Butler where they did a nice job. It's going to make it hard to really get to him. On the Georgia side, Asa Newell is only 6'9". It might look like a mega steal, and it probably is, considering this is a player, one and done freshman that was priced, at 10K to start the season because of his pedigree. It's a bit trappy. It's a really high upside price for him, but he's going up against a Kentucky team that definitely can get after it on the glass, can cause some problems. If this was a game that was on Kentucky's floor, I would step back, let the industry all go in on Asa Newell and probably watch him get into foul trouble and underperform. Being that they're at home, Kentucky's coming off a very emotional win that they're probably still drained from. Asa Newell it's got to be like a top 5 play on the slate at 6'9". Now, how much further over 30 can he really get? That remains to be seen. If it's one of those games where they're playing him 24, 25 minutes, it still could be a disaster. But in a close game against a conference opponent, we're expecting at least 30 minutes. He's a great play at that price. Now, the rest of the prices on Georgia have also tumbled down. Guys like Silas Demery, who's there at 6'1" after a really bad game against Ole Miss. He's very playable at that price point. Tyron Lawrence there at 5'8". He's got some upside. I definitely like him. And then we don't have to get bit by Deshane Montgomery, who I really like coming into the season. Wasn't able to play until late November. Didn't have a very good game against Ole Miss. Did play 16 minutes. He had a questionable tag after the Ole Miss game, but he's going to play. I don't foresee him missing this game from what I've read on boards. He's really good, great rates. He's just like a phenomenal scorer, but they priced him at 6'1". So it's almost as if they saved him from ourselves, because at 4'1", again, I'd have to reload the clip on Deshane Montgomery, and I'm not sure I want to. This is a matchup in which he can definitely take off. He took 11 shots against Ole Miss. Like, he's just out there to fire away. But 6'1", he can do a ton of damage to your lineup. If you throw him out there and he hangs a 7 again, you're just done. There's no coming back from this slate's so big. There's really no coming back from a mistake like that, even if you have a player give you a 50 or 60. Now, if you have multiple players give you 6x plus, then you can come back from a mistake like that. But you don't want to put yourself in that position. So tread carefully there, but he is going to take a ton of shots. That kid is fun as hell to watch, and he's still really young, got plenty of years to go. Rates-wise, he has a 31% shot rate, 27% usage rate, just full flames ahead. Freshman at Mount St. Mary's last year, where he was a scoring machine. So I really like that he's playing, good to go there. But price is too high, and I think DK did us a favor, honestly. Blue Cane is there at 4'9". Played 27 minutes against Ole Miss. I do think there's some viability there on him if you can stomach the downside and the lower floor. RJ Godfrey, I expect him to play higher minutes if he stays out of foul trouble. They're going to need his physicality in the front court, so he's a playable option at 4'2" as well. And then I wouldn't be surprised to see Somto Cyril maybe see 18 to 20 minutes in this one at 4K. Shot blocker, rebounder. They're going to need him against Kentucky, so I do think he's an interesting large field GPP type of play, but clearly buy low opportunity here on Asa Newell and Silas Demery. Wouldn't necessarily recommend playing both together, but taking a stand on one. I think Newell will see the majority of the ownership there, so a bit of an in-house pivot there on Silas Demery. All right, next game, Nebraska versus Iowa. Iowa just doesn't play defense. Kamari McGee told us. Iowa 3.5-point favorite, total of 159. Lots of points to be scored here. Nebraska, hard to trust on the road. Our own Bull, our in-house Nebraska fan, he told us, and he's probably right. Some really interesting prices here on the Nebraska side. Bryce Williams at only 7.3, player that was up over 8K for most of December. Rates-wise, we know he's going to get a ton of shots off. He has been pretty solid peripheral speaking as well. His game is majority as a scorer, 27% shot rate, 27.5% usage rate, shooting 41% from long range. This is a very intriguing price for him. And then you have some value pieces to look at. Juwan Gary, who's definitely value at 5'9", going up against that Iowa front court. Fouls are the worry there with him. So it's probably not a main team look, but tournaments-wise, I certainly like Gary. And then you have Berkey, who's priced there at 5'4". It was a letdown against UCLA, a tougher matchup. I do think he can get back on track here at 5'4" in this matchup. Like, this is one where I could see Berkey dropping a 30. And he's in that balanced range there where we can load up a bunch of guys in the 5K range. Raleigh Worcester at 5K. continues to just tumble. I mean, eventually we're going to get to a price with Worcester where we're going to have to play him. I don't know if we're there yet at 5K, thankfully. If he has a horrible game here and he drops to 4.8, it's going to be closer. Drops to 4.5, closer, and then anything below 4.5, and I think we're just plugging him in and hoping for the best. But at 5K, we're not quite there yet. I don't know. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. Had a incident where the show crashed. All right. So just wrapping up there, the Nebraska side. Aaron Eulis is 3-3, is good to go. Did play 10 minutes against UCLA, so you have a near min price option there that you can certainly look to if you want. Definitely some combos that can be had. The Iowa side, we have some really cheap options. Peyton Sandfort, only 6'7", coming off a brutal game against Wisconsin in which they held him to just 10 fantasy points. He shot 1 of 9. That's a really cheap price for him. I don't like the matchup against Nebraska whatsoever, but this is one of those marquee buy low situations that we can really look to. Feel pretty good about him. I think that, the shot attempts are there, so unless he shoots 11% again, he's probably paying off 6-7 more often than not. Iowa playing at such a great pace. We know there's going to be a lot of opportunities. He has a shot rate above 27% at this point. Wisconsin just did a really good job and kind of took him out of that game really early and really fast. Owen Freeman also pretty cheap at 6'9". Both of these guys were above 8K just over the weekend. Freeman has been a little more controlled than Sandfort, maybe perhaps a safer option. But I do like Sandfort more in this one than I do Freeman. Josh Dix, Drew Thelwell, and Brock Harding, kind of the secondary options there on the team. They're all priced up. It's kind of crazy because Dix and Harding are now only 300 cheaper than Sandfort. Dix had a pretty nice game, 16-2 out last time out. And then Drew Thelwell, who's priced at 5'9", he had the best game against Wisconsin, 25-3 with 4 steals, put up 40. That caused his price to skyrocket there. It's less than 1K to go to Sandfort. You can chase the Thelwell game there if you want to, but I would just recommend playing Peyton Sandfort. All right, next game on the slate, Cincinnati versus Baylor. 5.5 point spread in favor of Baylor, total of 139.5. The Cincy team, I hate to say it, but they're being proven as a bit of a fraud here. I was worried about them Wes Miller's a great coach, but he did them no favors with their non-con schedule. And they were top 25 in the net when it first dropped because of their margin of victory. And it kind of shows you like, hey, you can play a bunch of cupcakes, but you have to beat their doors off. And then you can kind of, manipulate the net a little bit. But the problem is when you go up against teams who are good, you might find yourself struggling. And I use the term good as a relative standpoint because Kansas State, I don't know that they're actually good. I don't know that Villanova is actually good, but they did lose to both Villanova and Kansas State, those two games on the road, and then a home loss to Arizona most recently on Saturday, 72-67. They nearly came back. They tried, but they didn't have enough juice. The problem that Cincinnati is having, they don't have a consistent offensive option outside of Dan Skillings. Jizzle James, as good as he is an overall basketball player, he's much better as a facilitator defender. He's not actually able to go out and get buckets when you need them. And that's a huge problem because they needed him developed that way. Seamus Lukosius, the first month of the season, he'd been their most productive player. That can't happen. Seamus is more of a role player. Day Thomas, the veteran guard, they're starting to lean on him more. I think we'll see additional minutes for him in this game. But overall, Cincy, they're starting to get exposed a little bit. Going down the line, Dylan Mitchell at 6'6". Don't love that spot for him on the road against Baylor's front court. I think fouls will happen. Dylan Mitchell has arguably been the best player on the team from a fantasy standpoint. But this is just kind of a really difficult situation to expect him to stay out of foul trouble. Dan Skillings is the top option at 6'6". You can utilize him in your main lineup, but because he's one of the only guys who can get a basket, the defense is really, really stuck on him. He's seeing double teams. He's having to work through a lot. He's making it happen. I mean, 33 fantasy points against Arizona, but he was being harassed throughout that game. Respect to Arizona for the way they defended him. Jizzle James at 6'2" is a little bit too expensive for me for a guy that's just not scoring, but he is good. Aziz Bandiago at 5'5", he's in play too, but same thing as with Mitchell. Fouls risk there. Seamus Lukosius is now to a playable level. His price had gotten to like 8'4", 8'5" because he was so good. He was a definitive non-con hero. In conference play, he's been far less effective. But he's back in play here at 5'1". That's a really cheap price for him as guard forward eligibility, playing 30 minutes. So, yes, Seamus has been bad, but he's a hell of a lot more tolerable to use at 5'1" than he is at 8'4". And then you have the value in Day Thomas, who is coming off the bench. You know, he started last year, but we knew Jizzle would start this season. Missed a few games, but he settled into this kind of 6th, 7th man role. Expect 25-ish minutes from him. He definitely can put up 20 in that time at 4-3. He's one of those values that I think is going to go overlooked by the masses, but to me, he seems very, very safe. Baylor side, these two teams mirror each other. They don't have a lot of offensive consistency on the Baylor side either. VJ Edgecombe, Downs All-American, stud, one and done. He's put up some big offensive games, but that consistency is not there. He's shown himself to be an opportunistic defender. He racks up a ton of steals. A lot of his fantasy volume comes from the steals. That's a little bit harder to judge, especially going up against a Cincinnati team that doesn't really turn it over in that way too often. The shot attempts are going to be there. The 7-6 price is interesting because it is lower than the 8-4 that he just was. But I just caution against going too high on him. He's a large field or a bracket qualifier type of play for sure. Norchad O'Meara kind of hinted at earlier. He's still up there at nearly 10K. Has the upside, but I'm not really playing him too often. And when he goes off, he's so low owned, it doesn't really hurt us too bad. Best long-term prospect on this team, Rob Wright. He's seen his minutes kind of slide a little bit, playing, mid-20s, 26, 27, priced at 6'8". He got up there to an astronomical rate of almost 9K as well, which was just way too high. After a rough game against Iowa State, that price has dropped, but 3 of his last 4, he's been over 28 fantasy points. So I'm not jumping away from him at that 6'8 price just yet. However, because of the pricing errors on guys like Peyton Sandford for the same range, it just doesn't make sense to go right over him, especially when he's the 3rd or 4th option on the team. Jeremy Roach back and seemingly healthy. Played 37 minutes against Iowa State. He was actually rock solid. Got 16 real points for them, 15 real in the game against Utah. At only 5'3", he's very much in play. Probably the most confident in a Baylor play I am is with him. And then at 4.9K, you have Jaden Nunn. Really reliant on his scoring ability, but when he gets hot, he can blow the doors off a price like 4.9, so don't write him off either. We do have a questionable tag for Langston Love, who did miss their last game. So we'll see, because that is roughly 15 minutes to go around for the rest. And then Jalen Celestine, who also missed the Iowa State game, and he's typically been playing 20 plus, has a questionable tag as well. Pulling up the Baylor box against Iowa State there in the game, it got rough. Baylor ran 7. So if those guys are both out, we may have to consider at least one Baylor player anyways. Robert Wright being the one guy to come off the bench and play 28 minutes. The other freshman, Jason Asamada, played 9, and then all the starters outside of Norchad played 31 plus minutes. Josh Ogiawona played 32. He rarely plays that much. They had to work through some foul stuff with him, but he played a ton. This is a disaster written all over it if they have to try to get 30 minutes out of him against the Cincinnati front court, but we'll see. He's priced up at 5'8", so we don't really have to deal with him anyways, where he's usually priced at 4'5", 4'6", where he's been more interesting. But if Celestine and Love are both out, Roach and Nunn at those prices definitely come into play. All right, Utah versus Iowa State. I don't have a lot to say about Utah right now. I absolutely hate Utah. God, that team is really, really pitiful to watch. I will say this: if Gabe Madsen's point prop it was 17.5. It was 17.5 on Prize Picks the other day. The easiest under in the world. I doubt they'll give it to us at that again. Anything at 13.5 or above is an easy like generational wealth under. Just keep slamming Gabe Madsen point unders until further notice, especially in this matchup against Iowa State. Before we go, I will look those up. I couldn't believe that they had that on the board. That was the easiest prop of the season. He's all the way down there at 5'2", but I'm simply not taking players against Iowa State except for short slates very often. They get after it on defense. We know that. Lawson Lovering, who had been a really, really great fantasy option when he came back and got eligible and good to go, starting games, had some big ones, 33 against Iowa. Remember, Iowa doesn't defend anyone. Baylor and Texas Tech do. He's been under 10 fantasy points in back-to-back games. The only player I really have that much interest in on a main team status here is Caleb Lohner. Lohner's priced at 4.3. He did start against Texas Tech and played 21 minutes. He took 11 shots in that game, by the way. It was a blowout. But Lohner is, now that football season's over, he's starting to do some things, and he's pretty viable there. And again, he's a play that I see getting a little bit overlooked by the masses. But if he starts, and I expect him to play 20 to 22 minutes regardless, but as a starter, it's a little bit more comfortable there. Only 4.3. Not a ton of upside, but there's safety there, and he can get close to 5x at this 4.3 price point. Ezra Azor missed the Texas Tech game. I expect him to be back. It's not injury related, so we'll see some personal issues there. We did see Hunter Erickson play 25 minutes there, only 5 fantasy points in that period. Anyone who can play 25 to 30 and not put up double digits is not really anyone I want to work with. And then Zach Keller, who was pretty solid. He's actually put up double-digit fantasy points in 4 straight. I liked the way he played against Texas Tech in that game. He was a willing scorer at 3.6. Certainly interesting there, and we'll see what kind of news we get on Osor before we consider that. But he's a 20 max, type play. You're not running him if you're only running 2 to 3 lineups. On the Iowa State side, Jefferson, as good as he's been, and I think he has a chance to really detonate against Utah, it's just a really hard price for me to get behind at 9.3. And he can put up 40. We've seen it a lot, especially lately. But that's just, it's a little bit of a sticker shock for me. I'd much rather play Keshawn Gilbert, who's priced there at 7.9. That's a reasonable price to me, especially a guy that I think puts up 30 plus more often than not. Curtis Jones has been the other scorer. Keyshawn and Curtis have been putting up some big numbers. Curtis got way too expensive there for about a month at almost 9K, so not playable, but now he's in a range at 7.2 that he can definitely pay that off. The projections don't love Curtis because his minutes were kind of all over the place earlier in the year, and there were some DVP issues and some other stuff, but there's enough box scores in now to make me think Curtis will be a pretty solid play, but he's one at 7.2. Regardless of his starting status, that we need to consider. Tamin Lipsy has just mainly turned into a defensive stud. He can defend as good as anybody in the conference, but at this point, the days of him getting 30 plus, they're not over by any means. He just put up 33 against was it Morgan State a couple of weeks ago. But against upper tier competition, he's just not going to be a primary scorer. He's going to be on the other team's best perimeter or wing option, and it's going to exert a lot of energy. So fantasy-wise, he's just not really that much in play. Milan Mankiewicz, he's playing some better defense. He is a running gun shooter. Definitely some interest there at 5'6", and then you have Deshaun Jackson down there at 5'4". His price ballooned up for a little bit as well. His minutes tend to get stagnant because of fouls, but going up against this Utah team, I'm not really that afraid of them whatsoever. All right, next game here, Kansas State versus Oklahoma State. Total of 146.5, a 2.5-point spread in favor of Oklahoma State. Kansas State, don't look now, but Coleman Hawkins is starting to kind of, I don't know, warrant that huge NIL deal that he got. I'm still not playing him right now at 9-1, but hey, 47 against Cincy, 34 against Wichita State, 41 against Drake, 33 against St. John's. Coleman Hawkins is starting to do some stuff, guys. He's playing a ton of minutes, 36, 36, 37, and 32. So he's on the floor a lot. Kansas State's bench is awful, and they're having to play Coleman Hawkins the entire game. David Ngason is playing most of the game as well. He put up a 40 against TCU. 17 rebounds. I don't necessarily expect him to have that kind of rebounding input, especially against this Oklahoma State front court. But Ngason at 8.3, he's at least in our player pool. Doug McDaniel is cheap at 5'6". Going to have to consider him as well. 35 minutes against TCU. Had an absolute horrible first half. Got into foul trouble, but he got it done for us in the second half. He was relatively chalky on Saturday, though. 12 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, put up 30. Didn't have any price increase, still there at 5'6". There has been at least 5 different players we've mentioned in the 5 to 6K range that are main team viable. Doug McDaniel is one of them. Other viable options, I suppose, Brendan Housen at 4.8. Streaky shooter, though. Doug McDaniel, not that much more expensive. We want to look to him for the majority. Then you have the CJ Jones, Caleb Rich, Max Jones, all secondary looks. Again, if this is a tighter price slate, we could look to somebody like Max Jones at 5'1" and maybe talk ourselves into him, but really no need to go there when 500 more, you can get Doug McDaniel. On the Oklahoma State side, the best player DFS-wise, statistically speaking, is Marcellus Avery, but he is over 6K, so that's going to be a little bit tough. But it might surprise you to go back and look at his log and what he's been doing against Oklahoma, 19-6. Against Tarleton State, 18-10. Against Oral Roberts, 9-6-3. And then most recently against West Virginia, 15-5-1. 24-plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 5 games. Doesn't start, but he is the most active by far. He has very strong rates. Typically the one I want to play on Oklahoma State, but 6'2", that price is a little bit difficult to get there. Doesn't necessarily need Abu Osman foul trouble to get there either. Abu is 6K coming off a monster 14-11 performance against West Virginia. They did lose that game, but he has scored 26-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. The 6K on him is a little bit easier to swallow than Avery. Both of them are solid in this matchup against K-State. And then those secondary looks, guys like Arturo Dean, Khalil Brantley, Bryce Thompson, all under 5K. Spotty value at best. I think the one I'd most likely be into would be Arturo Dean. But I can't sit here and definitively say one way or another because I don't expect any of them to put up more than 18 at most. All right, last game on the slate here, Georgetown versus Marquette. Marquette 12.5-point favorites, total of 145.5. This would be a smash spot, you might think, for Thomas Sorber, but quickly found out the DVP against Marquette isn't great for big men. We've had several coming into matchups with Marquette, and they've been able to do a really good job there. So the near 10K price for Sorber, it is a luxury price, to be clear. He has been great, but I just don't know that we can utilize him in anything more than a GPP alt type build. Micah Peavy is up over 8K. He's going to have his work cut out for him because Marquette's defensive pressure. I don't think he's going to have an easy time scoring. Nice thing about Peavy, he plays just about every single minute. We did see the Malik Mack explosion against Xavier. 26 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists. He's playing just about every minute. Georgetown's really played well under Ed Cooley this year. The rotation has shrunk down in typical Ed Cooley fashion. He plays the starters all the minutes they can handle. Malik Mack, 3 straight games over 30 fantasy points. He did miss a little bit of time there because of the lower body injury, but he's out here playing big minutes, 8 of 16 against Xavier. That was one of his best performances of the season in a Georgetown uniform. Priced at 7.5. We can definitely get there. It's possible, but that is more of a secondary look. Do like Jaden Epps a lot. However, he didn't start. He was available against Xavier, didn't start, and only played 4 minutes. So we'll see what happens there. If he starts, we can get there at 6.1. If he doesn't, probably can't utilize him. And even if he does start, that 6.1 price is really good buy low for him, but the matchup it kind of stinks against Marquette. I think this could be a game that could really hurt Georgetown. If Epps is limited and or out, we can still continue to roll Caleb Williams out there, who's still below 5K. 4 straight games over 20 fantasy points, taking advantage of the starting spot he has earned with the various ailments of Mack and Epps. 36, 27, 37, and 35 minutes. So definitely still in play. But remember, front court options have struggled against Marquette. He's more of a can step out and shoot, not necessarily a Sorber type that's going to bang down low. So it might not impact him as much, but that is something to keep aware of nonetheless. Marquette side, the decision of the slates, Cam Jones or Cooper Flagg. I think we have established we have enough value here to play one of them for sure, maybe even both. Cam Jones, up until last game, Brooks Barnheiser was like, you just play him at any price. If he has a bad first half, he has a monster second to make up for it. Cam Jones is the same way. Brooks had a rough game against Purdue, so that's no longer the case. But Cam, he had a rough start against Creighton, ends up at 44. Had a pretty rough start against Xavier, ends up with 38. Butler held him the first 10 minutes of the game, ends up with 43. Like, Cam Jones is going to get 4X at this 10-3. If you can afford him, you get those points in your lineup. It's really a nice thing to know that, hey, I'm paying 10-3 for a guy, but he's going to give me 40, maybe more. How much more over that? Probably not a ton. He's got, there's some other options on the team, but it's a safety that you're paying for there. I still prefer Cooper Flagg, but I am not going to knock anybody who plays Cam Jones. And there is a lineup out there that can play both of them. I would love to see people chase Stevie Mitchell. He was just absolutely incredible against Creighton. 18 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 steals. He has been a steals machine lately. His last 4 games, he has 14 steals. So that's propped up his number. But back-to-back games of 34 against the likes of Providence and Creighton. He's been really strong in conference play. 6'3" is just a really high price for Stevie Mitchell. His floor is literally like 5. So the Marquette bench doesn't get a ton of minutes, so Stevie's going to be out there for 25 plus, but I just can't do it with him. Something's still wrong with Chase Ross. I think the foot issue is zapped a lot of his upside. He played 33 minutes against Creighton, so he is playing a lot, but a lot of his minutes are basically Tamin Lipsy-ish. Like his defensive presence on the floor is more valuable to the team. He's not getting a lot offensively. The games in which we saw him put up 30s, a lot of that was because of the stocks, because of the secondary stats, peripherals. He did have a game where he scored 19 real against Dayton, but that's not typically what we're going to see from him. He's generally going to score that 5 to 6 real points, and then whatever we can get after him. The game against Creighton, I watched the whole thing. There was a lot of standing in the corner for him. there was a lot of defense or energy extended on the defensive side and on offensive possessions where he didn't even touch the ball. So the 5-1 price is great on him. I mean, it's really, really appealing to me. But this is where watching the games can come in handy because clearly his foot is not where it needs to be, and they're just not getting him the ball. He's not a threat on offense whatsoever. The Dayton game, they had struggles. They lost that one, and he was hitting some threes. That was more of an outlier. So we have enough options in the 5K that we don't have to go to Chase Ross. Yes, he's in the player pool for sure, but he's far below the other 5K range guys we've talked about. Ben Gold's 4.7. He's the value you play on tight price slates where we need a guy that's starting playing 25 minutes. He was priced at 5.5 against Creighton. He had a nice game, 8 and 6. Typically, we're going to get 15 to 18 from him. We don't need him on this slate, but he's definitely a look. And then David Joplin there at 6'3", 30-plus minutes. He's been rock solid. Probably one of the safer floors of the secondary Marquette options. I really want Demarius Owens to be a thing. He's not going to be a thing. Next year, he will be a thing. But the bench pieces, they're just not getting enough minutes. Royce Parham played 12 minutes and actually hit a couple of threes, had 8 points, put up 14 at near min price. But it's really difficult to peg that. We have cheapies that are getting more minutes that have more defined roles. And friend of the show, Scott, who's a big Marquette fan, Scott Wilterdink, he tried to warn me on Owens a month ago, and he's right. The Marquette guys, it's just all about their starters. So we did get the news that Sean Jones would be medical redshirting the rest of the season due to the knee issue that he suffered earlier in the year. So no Sean Jones for Marquette this year, which is tough. But Zeddy Lowry, Royce Parham, Demarius Owens, and Trey Norman are basically the remainder of their bench. And those guys are all going to kind of siphon off each other 8 to 12 minutes, and one may hit a couple of threes, but nowhere near valuable for DFS purposes until we get into some slates where pricing is really, really tough, kind of like it was today. That's when we can look at those type of options. All right. So that is the slate. Sorry about the in the middle of speaking drop off that we had. We haven't had any technical difficulties in a while. Self-produced show, by the way. Have a lot of edits to do on the projections, but the core, as it stands right now, the core that I am looking at is as follows. RJ Lewis from St. John's, because that price is just way, way too advantageous not to take. That's core play number 1. Core play number 2, I'm going to go up to Cooper Flag. You got to have a pay up, right? There's enough cheapies to make this happen. Got to have a pay up. So Cooper Flag, I am taking him over Cam Jones. Don't mind either. I think that's a nice problem to have. That's a coin flip that I'm happy to take the whatever option comes up. But Cooper Flag. And then we have several in that 5 to 6K range that we mentioned. We will go over to the Syracuse, Georgia Tech side. And say Javion McCollum and JJ Starling. I know that's 4 players that I'm giving you there. If you can't get to Flag, the tried and true core, Javion McCollum, JJ Starling, 2 that have to be in there, and RJ Lewis. But Cooper Flag's going to be the guy that wants. So those 4, most likely in my main lineup there. We'll figure out what the other 4 are, but those are where I'm going to start. Then we'll go into that Arizona-West Virginia game, maybe a little Tennessee action. Maybe a little bit of Baylor, depending on their injury stuff, and then a decision there to be had on Peyton Sandfort. But we can get all those guys in and have a pretty damn strong lineup with the misprices that we've seen. All right. So betting-wise, I like Nebraska plus 3.5. We've been mentioning that one. Tennessee outright against Florida. Georgia Tech versus Syracuse over 156. St. John's outright versus Xavier. Clemson plus 3.5 versus Louisville. Let's get into some props. See if they got the Gabe Madsen prop. Let's go on to the FanDuel. FanDuel has had better props, by the way. For some reason, DraftKings Sportsbook has taken away unders, and they're only giving you like 10 plus, 12 plus, 15 plus. Which are not nearly as advantageous because unders in college basketball tend to be pretty profitable long term, and they've taken them away. So I've fancied FanDuel or Caesars a lot more this year for prop betting purposes. So I'm going to go there. Let's check out what the Utah, nothing. So no props there on Utah. Let's go to PrizePicks. The books are smart, because we're just going to hit all unders on Gabe Madsen. I can't even believe that they fell asleep like that. PrizePicks doesn't normally fall asleep at the wheel like that, but they definitely did. I bet they have him a lot lower this time. Let's see if we can find him. Gabe Madsen, 12.5 points this time, so just below the 13.5 I was looking for. PRA of 16.5, points, rebounds 14.5. It's a little bit closer there on Gabe. I still like his under 12.5, but I mean, he hasn't even hit that, so I think we can still hit that, but it's obviously less of a slam dunk there. All right. Let's open up the rest and get a couple of PrizePicks going here. All right. Jordan Gainey over 10.5 points versus Florida. Definitely liking that. I think he comes off the bench there, and it's a pretty decent number. Tyrese Proctor over 11 points versus Pitt. I like Proctor in this one. We talked about him earlier, and he's in that cheaper range there, the mid 5K range. Peyton Sandfort over 15.5 points. I think we see a nice boost in Sandfort there. There is a night slate, one of those games being LSU versus Missouri. Bounce back spot for my man Mark Mitchell. His point prop is at 13.5, like the 13.5. And then Mississippi State taking on Vanderbilt. Claudel Harris, he was low owned over the weekend. Don't know why, but his point prop of 10.5. We like the over there against Vanderbilt. In the morning, there will be fantasy point props here on PrizePicks. We'll also do a bunch on Underdog there. We'll save those for tomorrow in the Discord, though. There is one PRA I like a lot. RJ Lewis over 23.5, and Zuby Ejiofor, I guess that's two, over 22.5 PRA here against Xavier. I expect both of them to have monstrous games. Just sets up pretty nicely for them. And then let's see here. VJ Edgecombe under 18.5 PRA versus Cincy. Just seems like a game that's going to be a little bit on the uglier side, and that's one that I don't feel great about. One more under, Raleigh Worcester under 17.5 versus Iowa. Raleigh Worcester unders and Gabe Madsen unders until they prove otherwise. All right, that'll wrap it up. We will be back tomorrow night, a little bit earlier, Tuesday night show, breaking down the Wednesday slate. Also, we'll be going on Sirius XM tomorrow, sometime between 11 and 11:30 Pacific Standard Time, talking about the semifinals of the college football playoff. We have been running extremely well from a betting side. We went, 4-1? 4-1 last week's show that we did on there. Really, really feeling good about the semifinal and the teams that we're backing. So make sure you check that out if you are a Sirius XM sub. Otherwise, in the Discord on FTN Fantasy all day doing our thing. Lineup talk, news, all of that good stuff, projections and context notes. Remember, articles coming on Sunday, but we will be back tomorrow night, Tuesday for the Wednesday slate, and then Friday night breaking down all of the action for Saturday. Appreciate all your guys' continued support. On the way out, please make sure you hit that like button. It is a tremendous help for me and the FTN network as a whole. See you guys tomorrow night. Same time, same place. Let's get those green screens and window trips. I'm out.